Hey folks, Matt Easton here, scholagladiatoria, and today we're going to look at something a little bit different, and that being the SMLE or short magazine Lee Enfield rifle, but specifically highlighting the fact that this was used extensively in the Second World War. Most people think of this as a First World War rifle, but it was used very, very extensively by both the British and Indian armies, and in fact some other forces as well, during the Second World War. But before I go into that, we're going to have a little look at the sponsors for this video, this video comes to you thanks to them. Take command of your nation's army during the darkest hours of human history. The Second World War with Call of War, the free online strategy game in which you get to fight up to 100 other players in real time and rewrite World War II history. Call of War is a real-time cross-platform strategy game played by millions of users worldwide. You can play from your mobile or your PC with historically accurate army units that move in real time on historical maps, a huge tech tree with over 120 different units and a vast economy system, and resource trade market. Everything is possible in Call of War to play through, all the different scenarios and outcomes of World War II. The game starts in a World War II historically accurate environment, but you can rewrite history as you want it and change the course of the war to your advantage. You can rewrite history your own way. Choose your country, join the war and fight other players in real time during challenging games, and whether you want to tank rush your opponents, establish air superiority, flood the enemy ground with battalions of infantry, bombard coastal cities with mighty naval fleets, or even dominate with the help of secret weapons such as nuclear bombs and V2 rockets. Call of War is fully cross-platform. You can play with the same account on PC or mobile. Each week sign up for special new events with different maps, different scenarios and different objectives. Go now to the link in the description to receive a free starter pack, which is 1 month of high command and 13,000 gold for a value of $10. It's available only for 30 days by signing up through the link in my video description below. So back to the SMLE rifle. So first of all, this is my rifle. This is on my firearms certificate. This is a rifle I shoot. It's one of my pride and joys of my rifle collection, and it is an original example. It is made, if we look on the breech here, it is made at the Enfield factory in 1916, and it is a Mark III Star. The Mark III Star, incidentally, was a sort of simplified version of the SMLE compared to the earlier versions. There are certain things it doesn't have on it that earlier versions had, for example volley sights and a magazine shut-off and things like this. So this is a sort of streamlined, simplified version that came about basically as a result of World War I's learning and needs and capacity for manufacturing as well. You will notice, the sharp-eyed amongst you, that it does not have the bayonet mounted on it currently that you might be used to seeing. I'll just take a very brief diversion onto the world of bayonets. So when the SMLE came out, it initially had this bayonet married to it, which is the 1903 pattern bayonet. And the blade of this comes from the old Lee Metford bayonet. So this, the bayonet that this basically comes from is the 1888, so very much Victorian rifle bayonet that was married to the Lee Metford rifle, which was a black powder version essentially of what grew into the nitro powered version of this 303 rifle. And this blade was reused, and then a new hilt was designed for it to marry up to the SMLE. These are very attractive things, but one of the things you have to know about before we go to the next bayonet, one of the things you have to need to know about the SMLE rifle is, whilst by modern standards this is a relatively long rifle, by the standards of the day this was regarded as a short rifle. That is why it is called the short magazine Lee Enfield. Not because it has a short magazine, but because it's the magazine Lee Enfield, so it's a magazine fed 10 round magazine bolt action rifle, and it is short, it is not long. This comes after, this is the successor to the long rifle, the Lee Enfield rifle, the magazine Lee Enfield rifle as it was known as at the time. Commonly known today as the long magazine Lee Enfield because it's slightly longer than this. Now, why did they make the rifle shorter? Well, there were various reasons, but the main reason was to make it a little bit more wieldy and a little bit more maneuverable and agile in the field. But there was huge opposition to this. One thing you have to know about Britain and rifle shooting, if we're looking around the year 1900 and very soon after, is that rifle shooting was actually a major pastime in Britain, and there was a lot of interest given to both target shooting by the military and by civilians. And remember that prior to the First World War, a lot of British civilians were also essentially territorial forces and volunteer soldiers as well. So you have military, you have reservists essentially, and then you have other civilians, and some of them enjoyed shooting also. And so there was a huge interest in long-range shooting, particularly with the new 303 rifles. And it was considered that by making the rifle shorter, it would reduce its accuracy and range, which admittedly it does a bit. However, in reality, in actual combat, this was shown to be of negligible importance at the end of the day, because these were still accurate for a long enough range that with open iron sights, you're still going to have basically a similar chance, almost the same chance of hitting a man-sized target. So this was called the short magazine Lee Enfield for that reason, the SMLE, SMLE as it's sometimes affectionately known. And these are iconically First World War rifles in most people's mind. Now, I mentioned, I was talking about bayonets. This isn't the bayonet you normally recognise. We've looked at the 1903 bayonet that came along first. Now, because this was shorter than its predecessor, they felt a need in bayonet fighting that they wanted to make up the length that they'd taken away from the rifle with the bayonet. And so they next came out in 1907 with the 1907 pattern bayonet that we have here. So they went from, I'll just pull out the 1903 for you, they went from the 1903 to the 1907. I should mention the initial 1907 that came out was heavily influenced, almost a copy of the Japanese Arasaka bayonet, and it did have a hooked quillon. If you find one of these today for reasonable money, buy it, and then you can make some good money for yourself selling it, because the hooked quillon variety are very well sought after. And in fact, unfortunately, they're also faked to some degree some of the time as well. But most people recognise that as the iconic World War I bayonet that you see on the short magazine Lee Enfield. But what do we have on it here? Well, this is where we really get into the topic of this video, and that is the fact that these rifles saw very extensive use in World War II. And this is a World War II Indian Army bayonet. These were made in huge numbers because they were seen as a little bit more practical and wieldy than the old 1907 bayonet. And frankly, these were also more usable as knives. They were easier to carry. Obviously, when it's on the rifle, it's less unwieldy, and you're less likely to get kind of caught up going through buildings and jungles and forests and things like this. And also these, it has to be said, were kind of cheap, knockdown price versions. They're not terribly good quality, but they're good enough to do the job. So just to take a little break for a second, I just want to remind you this video is being sponsored by Call of War, where you get in real time to play against other humans all around the world, and with like 120 different types of units. So you've got planes, ships, infantry, tanks, everything you can think of, including nukes and like V2 rockets and all this kind of stuff. Let's even have a look at me trying to get to grips with it. I wonder who I'll play as. Right, so this is the Second World War. What is Sweden on there? Well, they were neutral, but let's see if I can be Sweden. Start. Yes, I'm Sweden. Right. .com, I am in Sweden. I can see I've got some infantry there and there. I think it's in quite a good position strategically, actually, Sweden. The world is at war. As leader of Sweden, you have to defend your people. Well, of course. Your country has multiple provinces, and your armies are stationed within them. So it's showing me where the forces are. I can see I've got aeroplanes. They look like Messerschmitts. I've got artillery. Cool. That's all good. The troops have arrived. The fight has started. Collect reward. Collect. Ooh, I got some gold. Hurrah. Presumably that was our own gold that was taken by the enemy. Low morale. Low morale. The Swedish have got low morale. Morale is down after the battle. Increasing it will boost productivity and prevent riots. Use your gold to boost morale to 100. So we've got a full economic system here, as well as, so I can get new weapons and upgrades. Let us start by researching infantry and armoured cars. Armoured cars sounds like a good idea. So you can see here you've got a kind of a technology tree. So you've got armoured cars up here, and it shows you how and tanks and mobile artillery, or rather mechanised artillery, all kinds of stuff. So you've got your armoured fighting vehicles essentially here, and it shows the sort of tree of advancement for each of them. You can split up your forces as well. So I can see that I've got 3 tanks here. Where I'm going to take them. Maybe I'll invade Finland. Move to... Oh, you may provoke an undeclared war and harm our reputation. Your army is passing through territory of troops of Greater Finland. That's okay. I'm okay with invading Finland. It went great for the Russians. Let's try it. There we go. So it's going to take 2 hours and 42 minutes for my tanks to arrive in Finland. But I think that, I think invading Finland's always a good idea. And let's hope it's winter as well. That's sure to go well. So I've been playing this game for a little bit. It's really, really cool. Go and give it a go. It's free to download and start playing. So what have you got to lose? With the link below this video, of course, you get extra bonus gold, which means you can spend more on upgrading your troops, your tanks, whatever you want to do. It's really, really good fun actually, and I really love the idea that you're, playing other people and other humans. You can't obviously always choose what nation you might ideally want to be, because that might be taken by someone else. But maybe when you join another game, you'll get to be whoever you want. But to be honest, a lot of the tech and troops you get are going to be kind of standardized to a certain degree. So you're kind of standing on an equal footing. But yeah, it's really, really cool. And it's interesting that you've got the economics and the diplomacy and obviously the actual strategy, the battlefield stuff as well. So cool little game. And I quite like the idea that you've got this kind of like countdown clocks on all your different developments and stuff, the things you're developing, and even moving troops from place to place. So it is in this sense real-time strategy, and like moving from a place, they've actually calculated roughly the amount of time it would take to move from A to B with that thing. So if you're moving a tank from Stockholm to Helsinki, it will calculate how long that might take for some tanks to do. Pretty cool stuff. Go and give it a go. Yeah, Call of War, really cool game. Thanks again for sponsoring this video. So the SMLE, you think this is a First World War rifle, and it is. This one is made in 1916. But the barrel in this was actually replaced in about 1943, and that is because these rifles, as I keep saying, saw extensive use in World War II. So most people think of the World War II Lee Enfield as the number 4. And the number 4 was the successor to this. It was what, on paper, replaced the SMLE from 1939. So the number 4 Lee Enfield rifle, which people think of as the typical British or British Commonwealth and Empire rifle of the Second World War, actually didn't reach most forces until kind of halfway through the war. Most forces didn't get it till about 1942, and some never got it. So if we actually look at photographs from the Second World War, from Burma, for example, within any given photograph from Burma, you can often see a number of different weapons. You often see, obviously, things like Bren guns, Sten guns, sometimes Thompson machine guns. And you do sometimes see number 4 Lee Enfields. You do, towards the end of the war, from 1944 thereabouts onwards, you see number 5 jungle carbines. But you also see an absolute ton of these SMLEs. And why? Well, from my reading, there are essentially 2 main reasons. Firstly, these existed. Okay, these were in existence, and lots of people weren't getting the new number 4 Lee Enfield, so they still had the rifles that they already had in use, which were these SMLEs. But aside from that, there is a second issue which gets talked about less. So let's just talk about, was the number 4 Lee Enfield rifle better than the SMLE? Well, to a degree, on paper, yes. There were technological improvements, technical improvements, mechanical improvements found in the number 4 Lee Enfield, which on paper make it a better rifle than the SMLE. Two examples: for example, it has a free floating barrel, which means that with expansion and contraction of the wooden stock and furniture, it's not going to affect accuracy of the barrel. Okay, that's the first thing. So theoretically, the number 4 is inherently a more accurate rifle on paper than the SMLE. Another major difference is the manner of the sight. So the number 4, the Enfield, has an aperture sight, which most people find more convenient for ease of use and quick target acquisition. The SMLE has a typical V notch with obviously blade foresight that harks back to older types of rifle like the Martini Henry. And in fact, the original Enfield muzzle loading rifle from the 1850s. So in a sense, the number 4 Enfield rifle, it has the same magazine capacity, has a very similar bolt, slightly streamlined action, and it is in theory a more accurate rifle. However, reality in war and industry often runs contrary to theory of design. And what actually happened in World War II is, as I've mentioned, a lot of units weren't getting the number 4 Lee Enfield because it had only just gone into production in 1939. So they had to make do with these anyway. But in addition, the Second World War was incredibly hard on Britain, on the British Empire's economy and industry. And as probably anyone who knows anything about Second World War will know, there were obvious compromises that had to be made to materials which were used and quality control. And the reality was that lots of number 4 Lee Enfield rifles made during the war years were made of to some degree inferior materials, and their quality control was not so good. So much so that certain group of rifles, it was found that the sights had been completely wrongly engineered on them, and they were way off target. They were, not they were not usable practically, and they had to be completely refitted with new sights. The barrels, in some cases, were found to, because of the steel that had been used, they were finding that the heat from shooting was causing the barrels to bend. And these were World War II manufactured rifles. So the problem wasn't inherently the design. The design was good. The problem was the conditions that they were being made under. The Blitz was going on, materials were scarce, there were huge numbers of industries vying for the materials being used, from artillery to ships to aeroplanes to tanks. And quite simply, a lot of these World War II rifles were not up to the grade that some of the interwar years or World War I rifles had been. So in some cases, people actually chose the SMLE over the number 4, if they could, because they knew that this was a tried and tested rifle. And yes, it might be, 35 years older in manufacture, and it might be a much older design, but it would still do the job. And you know that it's tried and tested materials, which the newly made number 4, theoretically better, mechanically better rifle, but that has not been tried and tested, this might be more reliable. So even to the degree that if we look at the D-Day landings, we can see photos of paratroopers and other forms of soldiers who you would expect to have had the cutting edge equipment. You still see the trusty old SMLE still there in the front lines. So the SMLE was an absolutely important rifle throughout, obviously, World War I, but throughout World War II as well. And it should get more credit for that. It should get more credit as a very important rifle in World War II for the role that it played in the British Army, the Indian Army, and other armies as well, obviously Australian forces, Canadian forces, and so on. So there we go. Hopefully you now know a little bit more about the British SMLE rifle, and you'll understand why I have a bayonet attached to it for the purposes of this video, which doesn't look like the normal bayonet that you see in all of those iconic World War I pictures and movies and things like this. And I personally love this rifle. This was manufactured in 1916, as we've seen. It was rebarreled, I believe, in 1943. So this potentially was carried in 2 world wars, and it still shoots sweetly today. It's a beautiful rifle in loved condition, much loved by me. And I have almost the full array of bayonets that can go on it as well. So once again, I've just got to reiterate that I'm hugely grateful to Call of War for sponsoring this video and making this video possible. Go and download that link below. Now you're going to get your special kind of starter pack, high value starter pack. It's only available for 30 days, okay? And the link's below there, everything you need. The game is free to play, okay? So go and download it now, have some fun, re-fight World War II and see how quickly you can win it using your own strategies and your own tactics, and see which side is going to win the Second World War this time. Thanks for watching. Check out the link below, and cheers to Call of War for sponsoring this video. I will see you all again for another video on Scholar Gladiatoria channel. Cheers, folks.